He stood there in silence, eyes fixed on the ancient remains of a long-dead pharaoh. Surrounded by candlelight and the echo of whispers, Napoleon Bonaparte, one of history's greatest conquerors, stared into the face of a mummy. But why? What could a French emperor possibly find in the leathery skin and hollow eyes of the long-forgotten dead? Was it scientific curiosity, a hunger for immortality, or something darker, something mystical? In this video, we're peeling back the dusty layers of history to uncover a strange and lesser-known side of Napoleon's story: his obsession with mummies. Yes, the same man who redrew the map of Europe was also fascinated by the relics of ancient Egypt. He brought scholars to Egypt, explored tombs, and may have even spent a mysterious night alone inside the Great Pyramid. You'll discover the real reason behind his Egyptian expedition. Creepy tales of mummy unwrapping. This obsession ignited a wave of Egyptomania across Europe, and why Napoleon might have seen more than just bones and bandages. It's a tale of ambition, superstition, and the strange ways power meets death. So grab a seat, stay till the end, and prepare for a journey into the eerie shadows of the past. Welcome to Restless Historian, where we uncover the strange and hidden side of history. If you love forgotten stories, dark mysteries, and powerful figures with unusual secrets, make sure to subscribe and join us for more haunting tales from the past. In July 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte led a massive French fleet, 400 ships carrying nearly 54,000 soldiers, into Egypt. Their first target was Alexandria, conquered in early July 1798. By mid-July, he defeated the Mamluks at the Battle of the Pyramids and took control of Cairo. But it wasn't just a military expedition. Napoleon brought along something unusual: a group of 167 scholars, scientists, artists, and engineers. They were later called the savants. This mix of soldiers and scholars was deliberate. Napoleon wasn't just there to conquer land, he was there to conquer knowledge. He envisioned Egypt as more than a battleground. It was a treasure trove waiting to be explored, measured, catalogued, and understood. His goal: to boost French science, impress Europe, and show that France could control both armies and ideas. These savants formed the Commission des Sciences et Arts d'Egypte, later founding the Institut d'Egypte in Cairo in August 1798. With libraries, labs, printing presses, and even a newspaper called Courrier de l'Egypte, they set to work. Painters sketched temples, engineers measured slopes and blocks. Naturalists studied crocodiles and plants. Chemists tested Nile water. All of it was documented carefully for a huge scientific record, which would become Description de l'Egypte. Among their many finds was the now famous Rosetta Stone, discovered by engineer Pierre-François Bouchard in July 1799. Written in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs, it became the key to decoding Egypt's ancient script. That breakthrough ignited a fever, not just scholarly interest, but public obsession. As news of discoveries spread, Egyptomania swept across Europe. People became fascinated with everything Egyptian: scrolls, hieroglyphs, pyramids, and most shockingly, mummified bodies. These relics, once hidden in tombs, became prized objects in French and European museums. The savants didn't just study mummies, they collected them, sometimes by the hundreds. They crated them, shipped them, and displayed them. And once in Europe, mummies fed more than curiosity. They fueled industries. Anatomists dissected them publicly. Artists crushed them for mummy brown paint pigment. Some mummies were even burned or dissolved for medicines. Back in Egypt, the savants worked under difficult conditions. Supplies were lost when the French fleet was sunk at Aboukir Bay. Diseases spread. Local uprisings broke out. But despite setbacks, their dedication never wavered. They pressed on, mapping monuments in Upper Egypt, Luxor, Karnak, Dendera, places unseen by most Europeans. Artist Dominique Vivant Denon later wrote how the whole army stood in amazement at the ancient temples. Though Napoleon himself left Egypt in August 1799 to return to France, the savants remained until 1801. They were stranded when British forces captured the French fleet. But their work continued. They completed surveys, sketches, and experiments. They published the multi-volume description, De l'Egypte from 1809 onwards. Filled with maps, engravings, and descriptions, it became the most comprehensive record of Egypt yet seen in Europe. By the time the savants finally left Egypt, they had sparked what would become a cultural whirlwind. Egyptian symbols popped up in Parisian architecture. Obelisks were erected in city squares. Jewelry, furniture, fabric, even funerary motifs became Egyptian-themed. Museums devoted rooms to Egyptian antiquities. This craze continued for decades. And at the heart of it all was Napoleon's bold idea: bring scholars, not just soldiers. He harnessed knowledge as a weapon. He turned ancient tombs into laboratories. He made mummies more than curiosities. They became symbols of empire, science, and power. In that dusty desert, amid campaigns and revolts, Napoleon sparked a revolution in how Europe saw Egypt. The savants brought back more than scrolls and stones. They brought back ideas, art, and obsession. And those mummies, they became the living well, the unliving proof that the past still holds power over the present. Napoleon's arrival in Egypt didn't just open a new chapter of conquest, opened a door to mystery. He stood at the foot of the Great Pyramid, silent amid rows of stone, feeling its immense weight as if it carried the whispers of gods. Stories say he once spent a night inside the pyramid. Some historians note there's no solid record, no diary entry or letter from Napoleon admits to it, but the legend persists in spiritual and mystical circles, painting a picture of an emperor searching for insight among the ancient dead. Skeptics point out Napoleon was a rational man. He loved maps and military precision. Why chase ghosts in a tomb? One theory says he was looking for power that went beyond armies. In the dim hallways of Giza, perhaps he hoped to touch something timeless, something that conquered death itself. Ridley Scott's film Napoleon leans into this idea. At one point, Napoleon's soldiers pry open a sarcophagus. He climbs onto a crate to bring his face close to a mummy's. He gently reaches out and the mummy shifts. Joaquin Phoenix's surprise is real. Scott kept the take because it captured the moment's shock and eeriness. Scott himself explained his choice. It was such a beautiful counterpoint of two universes. The modern universe of Napoleon Bonaparte, and the ancient universe of the pharaoh, he said. That contrast Napoleon's hard-edged ambition versus cold, silent antiquity becomes a silent dialogue. Josephine watched. Officers looked on in confusion. The scene feels more like a meeting of ghosts than historians. Movie reviewers noticed the mood. One wrote, "The remains glare back at him, acting as a mirror to Napoleon's inevitable demise." The mummy becomes a reflection, not just of death, but of legacy and the limits of human reach. But historians push back. Many say Napoleon never ordered sarcophagi opened publicly. The real savants studied inscriptions, statues, and tomb paintings. They catalogued hieroglyphs and sketched walls, not poked around linen-wrapped corpses. The film's scene may exaggerate, but it holds emotional truth. Even Reddit users have chimed in. One commented, "Napoleon using a stool, Napoleon Joaquin. Phoenix levels himself eye to eye with an unearthed mummy. The remains glare back at him, acting as a mirror." Another added, "The Egyptian campaign is resolved in two embarrassing scenes, with Napoleon bombing the pyramids and observing a mummy. On screen, the scene works. Napoleon touches a dead king's face, a quiet, electric moment. Modern man meets ancient immortality, and neither moves. Some believe the scene was meant to ground the legendary figure. Ridley Scott's vision, according to a reviewer, humanized the character better than any fictional speech might have. We see a strong man startled by the past. We see his curiosity, perhaps even a hint of fear. We don't see an emperor, we see a man questioning. In real life, of course. There's no proof Napoleon faced a mummy this way. There's no official note on him climbing a crate. But stories have power. They hint at a deeper truth. Was drawn to Egypt for more than conquest. He brought hundreds of scholars, tools, presses. He wanted to study ancient texts, to touch the unknown, to reshape the world with knowledge as his weapon. So whether or not he literally gazed into a mummified pharaoh's face, Napoleon's Egypt campaign shows he lived on the edge of two worlds. He faced the living and the dead. He clashed guns and chiseled columns. In Egypt, he found more than territory, he found a mirror, and that mirror haunted him. Napoleon was more than a soldier. He was a man obsessed with power, legacy, and time itself. When he looked at a mummy, he didn't just see a corpse wrapped in linen, he saw a king, a ruler who once held the world in his hands, a body that had survived thousands of years, a story written in flesh and silence. Some say his interest in mummies was scientific. After all, he brought over 100 savants with him, experts who studied ancient remains, architecture, and hieroglyphs. But there's something more in the way people tell the story. A layer deeper than curiosity. Could it have been a spiritual pursuit? Napoleon wasn't deeply religious. He used religion as a tool, often to gain loyalty from the masses. But he believed in signs. He believed in fate. He once said, "A man becomes a ruler by his destiny, not by his birth." Egypt was full of symbols, gods with animal heads, pyramids pointing toward the heavens, tombs built to last forever. To a man chasing immortality, this was intoxicating. And then, there's another view: power. Napoleon wanted to be seen, not just as a European general, but as a figure equal to the pharaohs. The French campaign in Egypt wasn't just about defeating the Mamluks, it was about showing the world that he was more than a military leader, he was an heir to ancient greatness. By associating himself with Egypt, Napoleon linked his modern image to one of the world's oldest empires. The pharaohs ruled with absolute power. Their stories were carved in stone, their bodies preserved for eternity. To Napoleon, this may have been the ultimate goal, not just to rule, but to be remembered forever. There's a famous painting of Napoleon in Egypt. He's standing tall, in full military dress, in front of the Sphinx. It's not just art, propaganda. It sends a message. I am not just part of history, I am equal to its greatest legends. And the mummy. It becomes a symbol in that message. A mummy is a bridge between life and death, between past and present. When Napoleon gazed into the hollow eyes of a mummified king, he wasn't looking at death. He was looking at endurance, at legacy, at power frozen in time. To touch a mummy was to touch something eternal. For a man who feared being forgotten, this meant everything. Even his followers understood this. They brought back artifacts, decorated Paris with Egyptian motifs, and styled furniture after sarcophagi. The symbols of Egypt became the symbols of Napoleon. Obelisks rose in French cities. Public monuments used hieroglyphic designs. In a way, Napoleon wrapped himself in the same cloth as the pharaohs, figuratively, not literally. This obsession grew with time. Back in France, stories of mummies continued to spread. Mummy unwrapping parties became popular among the elite. Some artists used crushed mummy remains in their paint. The dead were no longer resting, they were being consumed, studied, and displayed. And all of this had its roots in one campaign, Napoleon's journey through Egypt. So, what drove him? Was it the silence of the tombs? The cold air inside the pyramids? The stillness of the dead? Or was it the idea that something, anything, could outlast time? Napoleon's empire would eventually fall. His armies would be beaten. He would die in exile on a small island. But while he lived, he chased a different kind of victory. The kind that leaves behind more than just a crown. He wanted to stand among the ancients. To be remembered like them, and in every step he took across the desert sands. He wasn't just marching through Egypt, he was marching through time, and maybe, just maybe, when he stood before a mummy, he saw himself. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign did more than expand an empire, it unleashed a fever across Europe. Ancient Egypt became a brand everyone wanted a piece of. One of the most macabre entertainments were the infamous mummy unwrapping parties. Picture this: a crowded drawing room, candlelight dancing on linen wrappings, a surgeon/showman carefully pulling off layers. Guests gasped at dried flesh and resin-soaked bandages, then sniffed spices. passed around amulets, and recorded every moment. It began with a pretense of science like Thomas Pettigrew's 1834 unwrapping at the Royal College of Surgeons, but soon drifted into spectacle, complete with strong drink and theatre-style gasps. Victorian elites soon hosted unwrappings. At private homes, if you had a mummy in your collection, it was your ticket to social prestige. What was once a sacred corpse became social currency. The smell of resin and spice filled the air. The dried remains became both dark entertainment and exotic conversation piece. But the spectacle didn't stop there. An even stranger legacy emerged: mummy brown pigment. Artists ground mummies into paint, mixing flesh and bandages with pitch, myrrh, and oil, creating a deep, translucent brown prized for shadows and portraits. Painters like Delacroix, Martin, Drolling, Alma-Tadema, and Burne-Jones used it in their work. One famous story tells of Edward Burne-Jones burying an entire tube of mummy brown in his garden after learning its grisly origin. He exclaimed it was made from dead pharaohs and gave it a proper burial. The craze didn't stop with entertainment and art. Mummy-ground mummy powder was sold as medicine. People consumed it for coughs, headaches, dysentery, and epilepsy. Even King Charles II reportedly took skull-based remedies. With demand high and moral oversight low, Europe became a marketplace for corpses. Tombs were raided, mummies shipped wholesale to satisfy medical and artistic industries. In England, you could find ground mummies being sold on street stalls. By the 19th century, grave goods were literally being ground into paints, pills, and parties. This frenzy stemmed directly from Napoleon's expedition. His savants shipped artifacts, scrolls, statues, mummies back to Europe. They fueled the emerging Egyptomania, Egypt-themed architecture, fashion, literature. Dressing up in Egyptian costumes became a fashionable pastime. Napoleon's description of the Rosetta Stone and the lavish description de l'Egypte volumes brought Egypt to every drawing room and salon. Suddenly, hieroglyphs appeared on wallpaper and furniture. Obelisks towered in Paris and London. But amid that charm lay exploitation: human bodies treated as art, commodity, medicine. Even salon conversations revolved around them. Guests debated if a mummy held spiritual power, or whether the brown pigment added an eerie depth to a portrait. One could almost sense the dusty aroma of old sarcophagi mixed with Parisian perfume, and for people who couldn't travel to Egypt, owning a mummy or a jar of mumia was the closest they could get to the pyramids. Museums displayed whole bodies in glass cases. Scholars held public unwrappings at learned societies. Some salons even invited miniature theatrical reenactments of curses. So Napoleon's legacy was twofold. He introduced science and archaeology, but he also ignited a consumption of the dead. His expedition opened more than tombs; it whetted appetites for tangible pieces of Egypt, even if those pieces were human remains. In that era, a mummy was muse and medicine, pigment and parody. Europe treated them like curios, bought, unwrapped, ground, displayed, consumed. Egyptomania wasn't just about monuments. It was about manhandling the dead, using their bodies for profit and prestige. And at the center of it all was the relics Napoleon and his savants brought home, forever altering how the West viewed death, history, and exoticism. When Napoleon first landed in Egypt, he saw more than a battlefield. He saw a classroom under the desert sun. He didn't just bring troops. He brought over 160 scholars, artists, engineers, and naturalists. Together they formed the Commission des Sciences et Arts d'Egypte and founded the Institut d'Egypte in Cairo on August 22, 1798. With Napoleon himself as vice president and Gaspard Monge at the helm, the savants worked fast. By 1809, they began publishing the vast, multi-volume masterpiece Description de l'Egypte. It documented Egypt's monuments, geography, flora, fauna, even its modern life. With maps, engravings, essays, and scientific tables, it became a foundation for modern Egyptology, like nothing before. Their mapping was revolutionary. The Carte de l'Egypte used triangulation, clear, accurate, modern-style surveying, It helped open a path for engineers to one day build the Suez Canal. Scientists catalogued insects, crocodiles, salt chemistry, laying groundwork for geology, zoology, and entomology. By the mid-19th century, description de legiped had sparked a craze. Obelisks cropped up in European capitals. Museums opened entire wings for Egyptian antiquities, starting with the Louvre in 1827. Archaeology shifted from treasure hunting to careful study. This was Napoleon's proud achievement. A conquering army turned into a science machine. He harnessed knowledge to power, and for many, it marked the birth of modern archaeology and Egyptology. But this triumph came with a darker echo. The same forces that catalogued hieroglyphs also emptied tombs. They packed mummies, statues, inscribed blocks and scrolls into crates bound for France. Ships sank. Gear was lost. But many artifacts survived and stayed in French hands. Critics say description de legiped was propaganda thinly veiled as science. The volumes painted France as Egypt's benevolent protector. But underneath lay an attitude: Egypt was there to be studied, measured, and taken. Edwards said later called it an act of that great collective appropriation of one country by another. It was knowledge taken at the barrel of a gun. Individual scholars could be ruthless. Scientists burned mummy bits for medicine. Painters ground up linen wrappings into mummy brown pigment. Public dissections further desecrated sacred remains. Artifacts were sold, traded, displayed without respect to cultural meaning. Some French officers saw Egypt like an open-air warehouse. Locals watched their past vanish in boxes and shipholds. Tomb goods were picked apart, displayed in salons, or used for pigments. Mummies became material goods, not sacred ancestors. Local resistance flared. In October 1798, Cairo rose against the French. They destroyed the Institute's printing press. The assault showed deep resentment not just at invasion, but at theft of heritage. Hundreds of years later, that tension remains. For Western archaeologists, Napoleon's campaign was a gift. Loyal records preserved monuments that would have otherwise decayed. But for Egyptians, it was a pillaged story. One whose pieces remain scattered across European museums and private collections. Even today, debates rage around artifact repatriation. Who owns a mummy or statue found centuries ago under foreign rule? Napoleon's campaign forced the question: is science a worthy trade for cultural loss? So in Egypt's sandy halls, a paradox lies. The expedition founded a new science. It launched careers, museums, and knowledge networks. But it also carried away souls' remains, relics, spiritual heritage torn from tomb and context. Napoleon's Egypt campaign was as much about intellectual empire as military. Yet that empire was built on fragile ground. The ethics of conquest still ripple through archaeology today. Napoleon Bonaparte wasn't just a military genius. He was a man of deep contradictions, rational but impulsive, coldly strategic, yet strangely fascinated by symbols, power, and legacy. And when we talk about his interest in Egypt, in mummies, in pyramids, one question keeps coming up. Was it all about ambition? Or was there something more? Some historians argue it was pure ambition. Egypt was a stepping stone to India. Napoleon wanted to strike at Britain's trade routes. Conquering Egypt was a strategic move. Bringing scientists and artists. That was a way to show France's superiority in culture and science, not mysticism. According to this view, Napoleon saw Egypt not as a holy land, but as another piece in a very calculated game. But others point to something deeper. Why was he so interested in the pyramids? Why did he insist on bringing dozens of sepulchres? Why? Did he surround himself with images of Roman emperors and Egyptian pharaohs? Why was he fascinated by tombs? There's a famous story, maybe legend, maybe not, that Napoleon spent a night alone inside the Great Pyramid. No one knows what happened, but when he came out, he looked pale, shaken. He wouldn't talk about it. When someone asked him what he saw, he said, "You wouldn't believe me." That story may not be true, but it reveals something real: how people saw Napoleon, even in his own time. Not just as a general, not just as a ruler, but as a man chasing something eternal. Some say he wanted to connect with the past, to take the power of ancient kings and claim it for himself. In Egypt, pharaohs ruled not just through war, but through myth. Their tombs were built to last forever. Their images were carved in stone. To Napoleon, who dreamed of lasting greatness, that must have meant something. And it wasn't just in Egypt. Later in life, he styled himself as a Roman emperor. His coronation included Roman symbols. He had his portrait painted with golden laurel crowns. He wanted to be more than a leader, he wanted to be a legend. Others believe his obsession with Egypt was a kind of spiritual hunger. He was raised Catholic but didn't seem deeply religious. Yet he surrounded himself with grand, sacred images. He wanted control not only over land and people, but over memory, over time, over death. In this way, mummies weren't just bodies, they were symbols. A mummy is a person preserved forever untouched by decay, unchanged by time. That kind of immortality would appeal to someone like Napoleon. So what was it, really? Was he obsessed, or just ambitious? Some historians say both. His actions were always bold: invade Egypt, crown himself emperor, march on Moscow. But his thoughts often turned inward. He read constantly. He wrote personal notes and reflections. He seemed aware of how short life was and how long history could be. Legend blurs with fact here. Writers, filmmakers, and artists have filled in the blanks. They've imagined him alone in pyramids, speaking with mummies, dreaming of ancient gods. Those may be myths, but the fact that they stick tells us something. Napoleon wasn't just a man who lived in his own time. He lived across time, in the shadow of the past, and in the hopes of a future where he would never be forgotten. Napoleon's journey into Egypt left more than footprints in the sand. It sparked a wave of Egypt that swept across Europe, changing art, science, and culture for generations. From massive academic works to eerie mummy unwrappings in Victorian salons, the fascination he ignited still lingers today. But that obsession also raised deep ethical questions. Ancient tombs were opened. Sacred bodies were shipped across continents. Artifacts became trophies. In the name of science and empire, much was taken and much was lost. Still, one truth remains. Napoleon wasn't just chasing military glory. He was chasing something far more elusive, a kind of immortality. Perhaps he saw it in the pyramids. Perhaps he felt it in the hollow stare of a preserved king. He wasn't just fighting wars. He was staring death in the face and hoping to outlive it. So now we ask you, what do you think Napoleon saw in that mummy? A warning, a mirror, or a promise? If you enjoyed this strange and fascinating story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Restless Historian for more forgotten tales from the shadows of history. Thanks for watching and stay curious.